Hi, welcome back to Military Publication Podcast. So today we're diving into FM3 Tech 90 Tactics. So it was just rewritten in 2023. It's got a lot of really great stuff in there. And so as a reminder, this, like all the other ones on this channel, was created through NotebookLM, and it was designed as a learning aid to you, maybe listen to while you drive or just got some extra time to kill and want to brush up on your knowledge. So there's some additional resources in the description below for this. We've got a Google Doc that does a really good job of walking you through it. There's a link to the publication itself, an infographic to kind of summarize everything together, and a link to my Notebook LM personally that's got all of the Army pubs that we've done so far. And if you like this, hit the subscribe button. If there's something you want to see, by all means, put it in the comment section, and we usually get to it in about 24 hours. All right, simplify and enjoy.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're on a critical mission to gain decision superiority over the very doctrine that defines tactical success. We are going deep into U.S. Army Field Manual 390, which is, well, it's the foundational text for tactics.
It absolutely is. And when most people, even practitioners, think about FM 390, their minds immediately jump to the big stuff: offensive operations, defensive operations, the decisive actions.
By the kinetic part.
Exactly. But our mission today is to really explore the tactical scaffolding that truly underpins victory, and that is the concept of enabling operations.
Okay, so enabling operations, we're talking about all the critical tasks that happen before the main event, or I guess in support of it.
Both, yeah. These are the tasks that ultimately determine if that big decisive action even has a chance of succeeding in the first place.
Then when you look at the manual itself, the structure tells a story. I mean, it's a huge commitment of space. You have offensive ops in one part, defensive in another, but then you get part 4. Chapters 12 all the way through 20 are dedicated entirely to these enabling operations.
It's an enormous chunk of doctrine.
Yeah, and it's all devoted to actions that, by their own definition, aren't even decisive. That's the part that I think is so interesting.
And that juxtaposition right there, that's the core thesis of the manual. And honestly, it's the core paradox of tactical leadership. The doctrinal definition is crystal clear. It says an enabling operation is an operation that sets the friendly conditions required for mission accomplishment.
Sets the friendly conditions.
You really can't ask for a simpler yet more profound statement on how you should prioritize your effort.
Condition setting is everything. But you mentioned a paradox, so unpack that for us. Why is it that these absolutely necessary actions are specifically defined as not decisive?
Because they don't, by themselves, secure the final end state. The text goes on to explain that enabling operations do not directly accomplish the commander's end state and are not decisive on their own. But, and this is the key part, but are required to conduct successful offensive, defensive, and stability operations.
So give me an example.
Sure. Think of it this way. Reconnaissance gets you the information you need, but the recon patrol doesn't take the hill. A breach gets you through the enemy's wire, but breaching the obstacle doesn't defeat the enemy on the other side.
They're just prerequisites.
They're the absolute prerequisites. The most brilliant offensive plan you can dream up is, well, it's completely doomed if the troop movement to get there is disorganized, or if your security posture is so weak that the enemy sees you coming from a mile away.
So really we're talking about mastering a very complex interdependence of tactical efforts. So what are the specific enabling operations that FM 390 identifies? What's on our list to analyze today?
We are going to break down all 9 of them. We've got reconnaissance, security operations, troop movement, relief in place, passage of lines, then countermobility, mobility, tactical deception, and finally, linkup.
That's a big list.
It is, and it's worth noting that the placement of some of these, like tactical deception and mobility, as their own dedicated enabling operations in recent revisions, that really highlights the Army's increased focus on this idea of condition setting in, today's complex environments.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Let's build that connection between these enabling tasks and a commander's overall philosophy. We know leaders have to continuously build and maintain their situational understanding. How do enablers directly feed that?
They are the eyes, the ears, and, the hands that are out there collecting the raw data. Command and control, at its heart, hinges on leaders understanding their operating environment through some very specific doctrinal lenses.
We're talking about the mission variables, METTC, and the operational variables, PMESIPT. So for anyone who might need a quick refresher, what exactly are we talking about with those? And why is that data collection the absolute lifeblood of these enabling operations?
Absolutely. So the mission variables, MDT, TCI, they focus you on the immediate tactical decisions. That's mission, enemy, terrain, and weather, troops available, time available, civil considerations, and information.
The immediate fight.
The immediate fight. Then the operational variables, PMECCI, they give you the broader context. That's political, military, economic, social, information, infrastructure, physical environment, and time. Every single enabling operation, but especially reconnaissance, is tasked not just with, finding the enemy, but with feeding refined, detailed data into all 15 of those variables.
So a recon unit isn't just looking for tanks, the E in METTC. It's also, say, inspecting and classifying a bridge, which informs the I for infrastructure in PMECT.
Precisely.
And without those robust, dedicated enabling ops, that understanding is just incomplete. It forces a commander to make decisions based on assumptions.
Right, assumptions instead of facts. And that lack of certainty, that forces the commander into a much higher risk operational tempo, which the manual describes using this continuum, hasty versus deliberate operations.
And that distinction is crucial, isn't it? Because it basically defines the inherent risk level of the entire mission. And it sounds like it's determined entirely by the success or failure of those enabling ops that came before.
It is the ultimate reflection of your planning depth.
Yeah.
A hasty operation is executed using whatever forces you have immediately available. It often relies on fragmentary or incomplete orders. A commander is consciously sacrificing planning and prep time for speed.
So you're trading vulnerability for tempo.
That's the exact trade-off. Conversely, a deliberate operation is the tactical ideal. It's what you're always striving for. It allows for the development and coordination of detailed plans. It incorporates multiple branches and sequels, and critically, it allocates the time you need for detailed reconnaissance, rehearsals, and synchronization.
So, to put it in practical terms, if my security element completely fails to detect an enemy flanking movement, or my movement control plan is just a mess, I might be forced to break off my deliberate attack and immediately transition into, say, a hasty defense.
That's the exact implication.
And instantly my risk goes through the roof.
It does. The mastery of these enabling tasks, especially timely, accurate recon and disciplined troop movement, that is the mechanism that allows a unit to execute a deliberate operation successfully, which mitigates risk and, just dramatically increases the probability of success for your main decisive action.
And beyond that, these operations force you to integrate all the different parts of your force, right?
Yeah.
How does the doctrine use enablers to achieve that synchronization?
Synchronization is achieved by integrating the 6 warfighting functions. So you have command and control, movement and maneuver, intel, fires, sustainment, and protection. Enabling operations are the glue that holds them together.
Okay, give us an example.
So take a linkup operation where you're joining 2 friendly forces. It requires C2 for the centralized planning, right? It requires movement and maneuver to coordinate the different axes of advance. It needs fires to establish restricted fire lines to prevent fratricide. It needs sustainment to get logistics to the newly combined force. And it needs protection, things like air defense coordination. If any single one of those functions is not perfectly integrated during that linkup, which is an enabling task, the entire force structure is at risk. The enabling op is what ensures all the warfighting functions flow together for the main effort.
Okay, so with that framework established that enablers are all about condition setting, risk mitigation, and synchronization, let's dive into the first and maybe the most vital set of enablers, the information foundation. FM 390 lays out reconnaissance, or recon, and security as 2 very distinct primary enabling operations. Now, they both gather information, but their doctrinal purpose is different. What's the fundamental distinction there, and why does a commander have to treat them separately?
The difference is all about their orientation. Reconnaissance operations are oriented primarily on the enemy and the terrain. They're trying to obtain information about their activities and characteristics. They are looking outward. Security operations, on the other hand, they orient on the friendly force, area, or facility. They are looking inward. Their whole focus is preserving friendly combat power by providing early and accurate warning. So you can think of it as recon is focused on generating data, security is focused on generating time and protection.
Let's start with recon then. You mentioned earlier its definition is broader than just go find the tanks.
Yeah.
What specific characteristics of terrain and meteorology does the doctrine actually require units to collect?
The definition is incredibly expansive. It says reconnaissance is obtaining info about the enemy or securing data about meteorological, hydrographic, geographic, or other characteristics of a specific area.
Hydrographic, so water bodies.
Rivers, streams, how deep they are. This includes trafficability. Is the ground suitable for heavy vehicle movement? It's about locating gaps in terrain, identifying choke points. It's really the engineer's domain just as much as it is the scout's. And all that data directly informs the commander's understanding of the terrain and weather in and mid-TC.
So the manual lays out 4 clear reconnaissance fundamentals. Let's focus on the first one. Orient on the objective. What does a focused effort really mean in practice for a commander who has limited time and limited resources?
It means the entire recon effort has to be driven, and I mean strictly driven, by the commander's critical information requirements, or CCIRs, and specifically the priority information requirements, the PIRs.
So if a commander's top PIR is to confirm the location of enemy air defense,
Then the reconnaissance unit does not waste a single second collecting data on enemy logistics, unless that logistics data somehow directly supports that PIR. When time is scarce, a unit might have to execute a hasty reconnaissance, and that means prioritizing those objectives, even if you have to skip tasks normally associated with a more detailed recon. The focus is what drives tactical efficiency.
and once contact is made, the mission changes, but it doesn't end. The second fundamental is to gain and maintain contact. Why is avoiding a decisive engagement so critical for a recon unit?
Because a recon unit that gets decisively engaged can no longer reconnoiter. It's simple as that. Their primary mission information collection is lost. They're now just in a fight for survival.
So they have to be stealthy.
Exactly. They prefer surveillance and stealth to maintain contact rather than getting into big firefights. And this is why the commander has to clearly define 2 things. Bypass criteria, what size enemy unit can be avoided to maintain tempo, and detailed disengagement criteria, exactly when to break contact to prevent being decisively engaged. It's a doctrinal acknowledgement that preserving the asset is often way more important than destroying a small enemy element.
And what about this concept of mixing systems? Why is relying on a single source of intelligence a doctrinal failure?
Mixing systems means you're using 2 or more different collection capabilities against the same information requirement. For example, using a ground patrol that's being cued by an aerial UAS surveillance feed.
I see, so you get 2 looks at the same target.
And there are 2 huge benefits. First, it just increases the probability of collection. If one asset fails because of bad weather or enemy action, the other one might succeed. But second, and this is probably more important, it helps you uncover enemy deception attempts.
How so?
Well, if the ground team reports, say, 10 vehicles in a valley, but the aerial thermal imagery only detects the heat signatures of 5, that discrepancy immediately suggests the enemy is using decoys or some other form of tactical deception.
That's brilliant. Let's apply this meticulousness to a really specific task, route reconnaissance. You mentioned it's far more than just checking if the route is clear. What are some of the key detailed tasks that engineers and maneuver forces have to coordinate during a route recon?
Oh, route recon is a major combined arms effort. The task list is intense. First, finding and clearing. Locating and clearing any enemy forces that could influence movement along that route. Second, trafficability. Determining if the route is actually suitable for the size and type of vehicles you're planning to move.
That includes things like bridge classifications,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, exactly. That's part of inspecting the infrastructure. This is where the engineers really shine. They have to inspect and classify all bridges, culverts, overpasses, underpasses, determining their length, width, and their load-bearing capacity. And that data is absolutely non-negotiable for planning follow-on logistics and moving heavier combat units.
Okay, now let's pivot to the protective counterpart, security operations. If recon is about gaining knowledge, security is all about preserving your ability to act on that knowledge.
Precisely. Security operations are supporting efforts, and they're focused on preserving the combat power of the friendly force. The definition says they provide early and accurate warning. Security forces operate out in a dedicated security area, which is designed to physically separate the main friendly body from the main battle area.
So let's talk about the Guard mission. The Guard is expected to fight, which is different from a screening force, which usually avoids getting decisively engaged. What 2 specific things must a Guard force prevent the enemy from doing to the main body?
This is a very high-stakes mission. A Guard force has to protect the main body by fighting to gain time, and specifically by preventing the enemy from achieving 2 things: ground observation and direct fire against the main body. They are expected to find and defeat enemy recon elements. A guard mission implies accepting a much higher risk of decisive engagement than a screen, because preserving time for the main body is the absolute overriding priority.
Which brings us right back to that central risk trade-off, which the doctrine talks about explicitly. How do commanders doctrinally balance the safety of their own security force against the time they're trying to gain for the main body?
This is one of the most complex leadership decisions. The doctrine mandates that commanders have to weigh two opposing forces. On one hand, you have preserving the force. This means accepting a lesser degree of security, which might mean giving up some terrain or having less prep time for the main body in order to keep your security forces intact for future missions.
Okay, and the other side of that coin.
Is gaining time. This is the willingness to risk the security force becoming decisively engaged. If that is the only way to generate the maximum amount of time for the main body to prepare, to maneuver, or to establish itself in the main battle area. The decision rests entirely on the commander's assessment of the overall enemy threat and the urgency of their own mission.
When you're deploying a security force for a stationary mission, like defending an area, the method of entry is critical. The manual talks about zone reconnaissance as being the most secure, even though it's the most time-consuming. Why is that the preferred method for establishing a really high security posture?
Zone reconnaissance requires the security force to clear the entire area, not just a few designated routes. They have to become intimately familiar with the terrain. This is preferred, if you have the time, because the security force itself is establishing a detailed situational understanding of the very terrain they might have to defend.
So they're not just guarding it, they're learning it.
They're learning every inch of it. They ensure there are no unsearched avenues of approach, no hidden enemy observation posts, and no undetected obstacles. It allows the security force to operate from a position of tactical advantage, which, in turn, increases their ability to fight effectively to gain that critical time.
Okay, so once we have our information and security is established, the next critical step is getting the main combat body into position. This is the movement foundation. We're talking troop movement, passage of lines, relief in place, and link up. Movement is often taken for granted, but the manual calls it the essence of battlefield agility.
It does. And agility just means rapid and orderly movement to concentrate your combat power at the decisive points. Disorganized movement translates directly into friction and vulnerability. A unit moving down a road requires extreme discipline, and the manual standardizes this control using a few nested layers.
Walk us through that. How do you organize a large movement to maintain control?
You've got 3 layers. The largest is the march column, which is all the march serials using the same route under one commander. This then breaks down into march serials, so like a battalion serial that's part of a brigade column. And then the smallest is the march unit, a subdivision of a serial, maybe a company, that moves and halts under a single commander.
So that hierarchy allows commanders at every level to maintain control and accountability.
Right. And it prevents the entire column from jamming up if just one single vehicle breaks down.
The actual movement itself is governed by those 3 movement techniques: traveling overwatch, and bounding overwatch.
Yeah.
What dictates the choice between them, and how does that choice reflect the calculated risk you're taking?
The primary dictator is simply the likelihood of enemy contact. First, you have traveling. It's the highest speed, but the lowest security. You choose that when contact is not likely. Then you have traveling overwatch. Moderate speed, balanced security. You choose that when contact is possible. The overwatching element maintains a position where it's ready to support the moving element if contact happens. And finally, bounding overwatch. Slowest speed, highest security. You use that when contact is expected.
So only one element moves at a time, covered by the other.
Exactly. It minimizes your exposure to enemy fire. So the commander's decision here is a very precise calculation. How much speed can I afford to sacrifice to guarantee my unit's protection?
And before the main body even starts rolling, there's another critical enabling task that has to have already happened at the destination. We're talking about the quartering party.
Yes, the quartering party. A small but absolutely essential specialized group. Their job is to reduce the main body's vulnerability when they arrive. They move out in advance, often with the route recon element.
And what are they doing?
Their job is threefold: secure the new assembly area, reconnoiter the immediate vicinity, and then organize the area. So, assigning company locations, establishing traffic control, planning local security, all before the main force arrives. A failed quartering party operation means your main body arrives blind, disorganized, and immediately vulnerable to an enemy attack.
And once the force is actually in motion, control measures are vital to prevent that traffic friction and congestion that can just paralyze an operation. What are the key control measures for movement?
They are the start point, or SP, the release point, or RP, and then checkpoints, or traffic control points, TCPs. The start point is where marching elements fall under the control of the march commander. All the timing and synchronization begins right there.
Mm.
The release point is where they transition out of that centralized control and shift to their follow-on mission, usually dispersing into assembly areas.
And the TCPs?
TCPs are used by movement control organizations, often military police, to maintain accountability, report progress, and most importantly, prevent what's called the accordion effect. That unnecessary stretching and bunching of vehicles that wastes fuel and just makes the column a huge vulnerable target.
Okay, next we move to some high-risk enablement. Relief in place, or RIP, and passage of lines. These are times when friendly forces are intentionally intermingled and concentrated.
Extremely high risk.
Let's look at relief in place. Besides just maintaining combat effectiveness, you mentioned it can be used for deception. How does that work?
Right, so if the enemy detects the relief happening, they might just assume the outgoing unit is being replaced by a similar unit. They'll continue to commit their resources against that location, which allows your relieved force to reposition completely unseen for a decisive action somewhere else. It's a relatively low-cost form of deception.
The high-risk moment comes during a simultaneous relief, where both units are occupying the same area at the same time. Transfer of authority must be critical here. Who is in charge, and when exactly does that authority shift?
This is an incredibly complex command and control operation. The outgoing commander retains operational control until a specific time or event that's established in the operations order triggers the change of command.
And what's the trigger?
It's typically tied to readiness. The incoming commander has to have sufficient communications established to control the fight, and this is key. Roughly 2/3 of the incoming security forces must be active and in position in the assigned area. That staged transition acknowledges the immense risk and ensures continuity of command during a period of peak vulnerability.
Okay, now passage of lines moving forces through a stationary force. That presents similar risks. Whether you're passing forward to attack or rearward to a new defense, what's the main organizational challenge of a passage of lines?
The main challenge is that it requires two parallel chains of command to operate simultaneously in one area. You have the stationary force, which retains tactical control over the terrain, and then you have the moving force, which is just transitioning through it.
That sounds like a recipe for confusion.
It can be. To mitigate that, the doctrine strongly recommends co-locating the command posts during the planning phase. And another key point. The stationary force has to control and secure the area far enough forward in a forward passage so that the moving force can reform into a combat formation before it makes contact with the enemy. If you fail to do that, your passing force meets the enemy while it's still in a vulnerable, disorganized march formation.
Our final movement enabler is link-up operations, essential for completing an encirclement or joining up with, say, an isolated airborne force. What is the absolute overriding tactical concern during a link-up, and how do you mitigate it?
The overriding concern, without a doubt, is fratricide. As friendly forces close that distance, the risk of misidentification skyrockets. So while the planning is centralized at a higher headquarters, the execution near the actual link-up point is decentralized. The control measures have to prioritize safety over speed.
So you slow down.
You slow way down. Momentum decreases significantly as the forces get closer to prevent confusion in what could be a very close quarters fight.
And how does the fire support community specifically mitigate fratricide in this scenario, especially with air assets in the mix?
This requires extremely precise coordination. Higher headquarters has to establish very clear fire support coordination measures. A restricted fire line, or RFL, is typically established, defining an area where fires are heavily restricted or prohibited unless the force commander personally approves them.
And for air defense?
It's crucial. The division artillery headquarters has to coordinate air defense coverage to make sure their fires don't accidentally engage friendly aircraft that are supporting the forces involved in the link-up, like attack helicopters or transport aircraft trying to resupply the isolated force.
And the stationary force has specific tasks to enable that link-up as well, correct?
Oh, absolutely. The stationary force is basically the welcoming party. They have to actively assist by opening lanes in minefields, breaching or bypassing obstacles, furnishing guides to the link-up point, and designating clear avenues of approach for the incoming unit. Their whole mission is to facilitate a swift, safe integration without any delay, ensuring the link-up is an enablement, not an engagement.
Okay, so we've established the information and movement foundations. Now we're moving to the operations that actively shape both the physical ground and the psychological landscape of the battle space. Mobility, countermobility, and tactical deception. These are the proactive shapers that create that positional and psychological advantage for the main effort.
Right. And mobility is defined as overcoming challenges in the operational environment to ensure freedom of movement and maneuver. The core mobility task, the one everyone thinks of, is breaching. And breaching is fundamentally a combined arms activity. It is not just an engineer task.
And the doctrine mandates that any successful breach has to adhere to these 5 integrated steps, known by the mnemonic SOSRA. So let's define those 5 steps and clarify how the force is structured to execute them.
So SOSRA stands for suppress, obscure, secure, reduce, and assault. And the breach force is organized into 3 components, each with their own integrated tasks. You have the support force, which is tasked to suppress enemy fire and obscure the reduction area.
So they're providing cover.
Exactly. Then you have the breach force. They're tasked to secure the reduction area and reduce the obstacle, so creating and marking the lanes through it. And finally, you have the assault force, which is tasked to assault through that newly created lane to defeat the enemy on the far side and secure the objective.
Let's focus on that support force for a second. You said their responsibilities go far beyond just providing machine gun fire. What non-kinetic tasks are they also responsible for?
This is where you really see multi-domain integration become apparent. The support force is responsible for controlling obscuration, using smoke to blind the enemy, and controlling other suppressive effects. And critically, this explicitly includes electromagnetic warfare, or EW, and air and missile defense.
So give us an example of that.
Sure, the support force might be using EW assets to jam the enemy's command and control or their reconnaissance systems in the reduction area, while at the same time they're providing low-level air defense against any enemy drones trying to monitor the breach site. Breaching is inherently an integrated battle across multiple functions.
We also have gap crossing, which focuses on natural obstacles like rivers or ravines. What's the fundamental difference between a hasty and a deliberate gap crossing?
A hasty crossing relies on whatever means you have immediately available. It's usually executed by the forward maneuver BCT, and it's done rapidly with minimal preparation. A deliberate crossing, on the other hand, is far more complex. It requires extensive planning, detailed preparations, and it usually happens when a hasty crossing has already failed or is just impossible because of the size of the obstacle.
And that usually requires more assets than a BCT has on its own, right?
It almost always requires assistance from a higher headquarters, because BCTs rarely possess the extensive engineer assets, like large float bridges or dedicated ferry platoons that are needed for a complex river crossing.
Okay, now let's flip the coin to countermobility. This is the opposite of mobility, using obstacles integrated with fires to deny the enemy freedom of movement. The doctrine defines 4 specific obstacle effects. Let's explore the tactical goal of each one of those.
These 4 effects give the commander a really precise lexicon for their engineering tasks. The first and lightest effect is to disrupt. The goal here is to cause the enemy to break up its formation, interrupt its timetable, or commit its breaching assets prematurely. This is often done with small, non-complex obstacles or nuisance minefields.
Next up is turn.
Turn. The goal is to divert an enemy formation from their chosen avenue of approach into an adjacent one, or, critically, into a pre-planned engagement area where your friendly fires are already zeroed in. The obstacle placement physically forces the enemy to change direction.
Okay, then we have
Fix.
Yeah.
This is about slowing the attacker's movement within a specified area, the engagement area, to allow your friendly forces time to acquire, target, and destroy the enemy with massed fires. This is the classic application of obstacles in a defense.
And the final, most intensive effect.
Is block. This is the most complex and resource-intensive effect. It requires the integration of complex obstacles, those requiring more than one reduction technique, with mass fires to completely defeat the enemy's breaching effort. The goal is the complete denial of that avenue of approach.
That progression from disrupting tempo to completely blockading a route is highly illustrative. How does a commander actually control the execution of these obstacle plans on the battlefield?
Control uses 3 specific measures. First, you have directed obstacles. These are assigned by a higher commander as a specified task. They are mandatory, planned, and resourced as part of the main effort. Most tactical obstacles fall into this category.
And what if you want more flexibility?
Then you use situational obstacles. These are pre-planned, but their execution is only authorized if specific criteria are met. For instance, if the enemy commits their reserve force, then you emplace the situational obstacle at checkpoint alpha. And finally, you have reserved obstacles,
The most tightly controlled.
the most tightly controlled. The commander personally retains the execution authority for these. They're used to restrict mobility along a critical avenue of approach when the failure to maintain control over that avenue would have disastrous effects on the current or future battle. It effectively places that obstacle directly under the commander's own C2.
Finally, let's address the psychological element with tactical deception. We know that this was formally moved from offensive operations into this enabling category.
And that's a huge shift in thinking. It recognizes that deception is, at its heart, condition setting. Tactical deception is any friendly activity that causes enemy commanders to take an action or cause inaction that's detrimental to their own objectives. The whole goal is to manipulate the enemy's situational understanding.
The manual specifies two main variations, the feint and the demonstration. What is the subtle but very important tactical difference between those two?
A feint is an attack on an area where decisive action is not intended. It involves limited offensive action. You actually engage the enemy to deceive them as to where your main attack is really going. A demonstration, on the other hand, is purely a show of force where contact is not intended. The goal is just to make the enemy believe a threat exists, forcing them to commit their resources or delay an action.
And deception often relies on manipulating signatures, right?
Yeah.
What are the two primary ways of achieving that?
It is all about perception management. Commanders can use falsifying signatures, so generating high radio traffic and electronic signatures to make a small force appear like a large attacking division. Or they can use suppressing signatures, using radio silence, camouflage, and movement control to completely conceal the location and capability of their true main effort. These observable actions are intentionally presented to form the enemy perception that you want them to have.
But because you're presenting false realities, what is the inherent tactical risk that the doctrine warns commanders about?
The risk is high, and it's multifaceted. Deception always requires taking calculated risks, but the biggest danger is unpredictability and the second and third order effects. The manual states that if an enemy believes a threat is real, they may act in unpredictable ways which can produce unintended and unwanted consequences for you.
So your feint could be too convincing.
Exactly. If your feint is too convincing, the enemy might commit an overwhelming reserve force to that location, which could shift the entire balance of power and possibly threaten your feint force. Or worse, they could attack your main friendly force from a new, unexpected location. Deception demands extreme planning rigor and constant reassessment of what the enemy is actually doing.
We've covered 9 distinct, very complex enabling operations. Ultimately, a commander has to integrate all of these elements into the larger operational scheme. So how does the doctrine guide leaders in prioritizing these enablers to ensure the success of the main effort?
The guidance really revolves around the operations process, moving from find and fix to finish and follow through. The integration challenge changes depending on what phase of the operation you're in.
So starting with the find phase, prioritizing reconnaissance and security, that's still the foundation.
Absolutely. The intelligence warfighting function's task of information collection has to be actively synchronizing your recon and security assets to determine enemy intent. In a meeting engagement, the force that reacts first often gains the advantage.
Right.
So leaders in fluid operations, like a movement to contact, have to be pushing their intelligence staff to identify the enemy force's most dangerous and most likely courses of action very quickly, because that directly dictates the appropriate level of security you need. If you don't know the enemy's intent, your security forces are just guessing, and your main body is completely vulnerable.
Let's talk about the critical integration of engineers. Since mobility and countermobility are their domain, how does their focus have to transition based on the operation?
The role of engineers is extremely dynamic, and commanders must integrate them early, very early, into the planning cycle. Their priority of support shifts instantly when the unit transitions missions. In a defensive operation, the engineer priority is explicitly countermobility. So, obstacle, emplacement, and integration with fires and survivability, constructing trenches and fighting positions.
But the moment you transition to the offense,
the priority immediately and drastically shifts to mobility breaching and gap crossing. A failure to shift those engineer resources, fuel, specialized equipment, personnel, at the exact right moment can halt an offensive dead in its tracks.
and the transition itself, say, from defense to offense, that's a moment of extreme vulnerability, and it's entirely reliant on successful enabling operations.
It is the most challenging transition. Leaders transition to the offense by anticipating when the enemy force is going to reach its culminating point, that moment when they're overextended and they just can't continue the attack. They're out of fuel, out of ammo, their reinforcements are failing to arrive.
And recon plays a direct role here.
A direct role. Recon provides the data to confirm that culmination. The attack is then launched to maintain contact and tempo, hitting the enemy right when they are dispersed, extended in depth, and disorganized, denying them any time to prepare a sustained defense. The transition itself is an enabling task designed to create the conditions for decisive offensive action.
Conversely, during a retrograde operation like a withdrawal, security elements is a really critical deception role to play.
They do. That's the role of the detachment left in contact, or DLIC. The DLIC's mission is pure deception. They have to simulate, as nearly as possible, the continued presence of the main body. They use tactics like false electronic transmissions, occasional attacks, maybe even dummy fortifications. Their success buys the main body the time it needs to complete the withdrawal without enemy interference. It's an enabling deception that is key to maintaining control during an inherently chaotic rearward movement.
Finally, let's revisit this concept of risk and allocation trade-offs, using the doctrinal example of the mobile defense. This seems to perfectly illustrate how an economy of force enabling operation directly ensures the success of the decisive action.
It's the perfect example. In a mobile defense, the entire structure is designed to set conditions for a decisive counterattack. The forces are rigidly divided into the fixing force and the striking force. The fixing force is the enabling element. Its task is not to defeat the enemy, but to contain them, to shape them, and to entice the enemy penetration. And to do that, the fixing force uses only the minimum essential combat power required to accomplish its enabling mission.
What's the direct implication of that resource allocation?
The implication is that the striking force, the unit designated for the decisive counterattack, is then guaranteed to contain the maximum combat power available. The fixing force might have to yield ground or intentionally entice the enemy to penetrate the main battle area, knowing they are sacrificing local success to ensure the strategic success of the striking force. This resource trade-off is the ultimate demonstration that tactical success isn't achieved by massing resources everywhere. It's achieved by using enabling operations to allow a massive concentration of power at a single decisive point.
The lesson seems undeniable. Tactics aren't simply about executing the main attack. They are about the rigorous, the detailed, and the synchronized preparation and execution of these complex, interdependent enabling operations. Mastery of the FM390 enabling chapters is mastery of condition setting. We have completed our deep dives into FM390 and the essential scaffolding of enabling operations. We've established that reconnaissance, security, movement, mobility, countermobility, and deception, they are the necessary prerequisites that allow offensive and defensive actions to succeed by fundamentally setting the friendly conditions required for mission accomplishment.
That's right. These are the elements that separate a high-risk, hasty operation from a methodical, successful, deliberate operation. And for you, the tactical leader, whether you're out there planning an engagement or simply studying the doctrine, the depth of this instruction, it has to be internalized. We'd encourage you to reflect on these questions and apply them to your unit's current operations.
What's the first question they should be asking themselves?
First, how well does your unit integrate reconnaissance into every single operation, particularly in determining the enemy's culminating point? I mean, are you merely finding contact, or are you executing the fundamentals orienting on PIRs, utilizing mixing systems, and clearly defining your engagement and bypass criteria to gather the deliberate information you need to transition decisively?
That's a huge one. What's next?
Second, do your security operations actually match the level of risk your main body faces? Are you leveraging a high-security method like zone reconnaissance when you have the time? And are your guards truly fulfilling their critical mission of preventing enemy ground observation and direct fire against the main body? Are you, as a leader, making those difficult, conscious decisions about risk trade-offs to either preserve combat power or gain time?
And the third one brings it all together.
Third, how effectively do you use terrain mobility, specifically the rigorous 5 steps of SOSRA and countermobility disrupt, turn, fix, block to create both positional and psychological advantage for your decisive operation? Are your engineers integrated early enough in your planning to transition their priorities fluidly from survivability and countermobility in the defense to critical breaching and gap crossing when you go on the offense?
Mastering tactics means mastering the enablers. The more deliberate your preparation, the better your condition setting, the higher the probability of success for your decisive action. We highly encourage you to continue studying the relevant chapters 12 through 20 of FM 390 to ensure you and your team are truly proficient in the enabling side of the house. We'll see you on the next deep dive.